he?
Yeah, he's going in.
Like, he's got like the Hunger Games beard going?
Yes.
And is that a rock rolling up a volcano?
It's rock rolling down.
Oh. Things aren't looking good for this young
We
man.
need a better heel, but that's not a good deal.
That was the sun coming down.
Oh, did you? Okay, yeah.
It's snow cap.
I know, that's what I was thinking. It's Mount Fuji. That's a little better. I mean, it might help if he had some ears and some lips. There you go. Give him a mouth. There we go. Now he's looking like he's got to go to sleep. He's got a pretty pointed nose, though. He looks like a character from The Grinch. There we go. Give him a Roman nose. He needs a big Roman nose. There you go.
He's definitely not wrong.
And he needs a dad bod. He looks like he's holding that belly. That thing's got to protrude at least another 2 or 3 inches.
Actually, I'm going to slim.
Are you? Okay. Make him look like a bass player.
Yeah.
Because bass players are all starving because they can't make any money.
How about that? Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. Outstanding. Welcome. Should we put a crown on him too? Like a pointy crown? It's really anachronistic if I do it.
Fedora. He needs a fedora.
Fine.
Yes. Yes. Okay. That's proper. Well done.
Good morning, class.
Good morning.
You know, they say you should never do art by committee. I don't know if they say that. I just said it, and it's true. Nevertheless, that's exactly what we did this morning. Welcome. We are studying the book of Daniel. In the first 2 weeks, we have covered how much?
2 chapters.
2 chapters. Can you believe it?
No.
I know. People are having palpitations in the front row. 2 verses. That's what it feels like sometimes. Yeah. So let's set the stage a little bit. You'll remember from our first lesson. Oh no, he's starting to recap. Now we're never going to get through it. Okay, through our first lesson, we did a brief timeline of the world. Started at creation, went through Adam and Eve, went through Abraham, went through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? Jacob and Joseph. Joseph gets into Egypt. The people of Israel wind up living in Egypt to avoid the famine. They grow powerful and prosperous, and that threatens the local nations. So they clamp down on them. They're no longer amicable. Now it's a slavery situation, and the slavery is getting very oppressive. That's 400 years after Joseph. And God raises up Moses, who looks an awful lot like that guy from Planet of the Apes, right? And, yeah. Look, if you're not prepared for this, there's coffee in the back. Well, help yourself. I'm buying today, all right? So he goes, confronts Pharaoh, and after a series of plagues, Pharaoh lets his people go, and they cross into the wilderness. In the wilderness, we have the Sinai Covenant, where God makes a contract with Israel, wherein a contract of love, not so different than when you get married, right? That's a contract based on love. Wherein he declares that he will be their God, and they will be his people. He will be a king unto them. They're not going to have a king, right? There's a series of judges. They move into the promised land after Moses. They conquer the promised land. They take residence in it. And then they say, you know what, God, actually, we do want a king. And God says, no, you don't. And they say, yes, we do. And so first king they get is King Saul. Tall, handsome, athletic build, coward, paranoid, doesn't wind up being a very good king. After him, God raises up a king after his own heart, a man by the name of David. After David comes his son, Solomon. And this is basically the peak of the kingdom of Israel. After Solomon, the kingdom is divided. The northern kingdom is conquered first. Do I have that right? Oh, shoot. You know what? I've got it in notes. Ha ha ha. That's why we take them. The northern kingdom is conquered and taken off into captivity. Later, the southern kingdom will be also taken off into captivity. We are at a time when Israel is in captivity. And the leader of the world superpower of the day is a man by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. And what Nebuchadnezzar does is he gathers the best and brightest of the conquered peoples, brings them into his court to serve him. And this has a couple purposes. On the one hand, he is cultivating a cabinet of the most talented people in the world, right? But also, it helps break the loyalties with the old nation, right? The leaders, the natural leaders from your people are now serving this new king. And if we go to war, now we're opposing our own friends and family. You know, my friend from high school is now serving the king, and, well, he seems to be pretty decent, and maybe that's not such a bad thing, right? So there's this process of sort of breaking the spirit of the old nation and assimilating them into the new nation. The book of Daniel follows one in particular of these guys who have been picked from Babylon's Got Talent or whatever, right? And those 4 people are, name them. Daniel, good. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Or Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. I'm trying, man. When I see them in heaven, I don't want to roll up to them and be like, Meshach. He'd be like, excuse me? Mishael. Yeah, you got to learn the names. Maybe we'll have name tags in heaven. That will be handy. All right, so Nebuchadnezzar pulls these 4 guys, and in chapter 1, what's the big conflict at the beginning of chapter 1, or in the middle of chapter 1? Food, right? They're brought into this training program. They're supposed to be given the food off of the king's table, the wine off of the king's table. And this should be a high honor, and it should be the best available food. And if you're getting the best food, you're getting the best nutrition, and you should be the healthiest, right? Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to eat the meat. We're not going to drink the wine. Just give us vegetables and water. We'll be fine. The eunuch who's in charge of that whole academy says, I can't do that because you're going to wind up looking all sickly and pale, and then I'm going to be in trouble. So they say to him, well, just give us 10 days on this diet, and then check back. If we don't look as good as everybody else, then fine. Now remind me again, why is it that are these guys vegetarians naturally? So why are they doing this? Are they Yeah, so most likely what's going on here is that all that meat and all that wine would have been dedicated, sacrificed to the idols of Nebuchadnezzar. And so by partaking in the meal, they could be participating in idolatry, right? So as a matter of conscience, as a matter of love for God, they're abstaining. Well, it works out well. They actually do get healthy and strong. They look better than everybody else. And so the eunuch says, well, I guess that's that. Everybody's on veggies and water. Chapter 2. Chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has had a troubling dream, right? And he calls all of his wise men, all of his diviners and enchanters and all that kind of stuff, and says, okay, I want you to tell me what dream I had and what it means. And they say to him, yeah, we can tell you what it means. Just describe it to us. And he says, no. Step one is you tell me what I dreamed. And they're all like, that's impossible. Like, nobody was in your head. We can't tell you what you dreamed. Tell us what you dreamed, and we'll tell you what it means. But see, Nebuchadnezzar is, he's really maybe savvy, maybe paranoid, maybe jaded, somewhere in there, right? He knows that people are in the business of telling him what he wants to hear, but he doesn't want somebody to tell him what he wants to hear. He wants people to tell him the truth. And that's commendable, right? And he wants it to come with supernatural authority. Well, if you're a wizard, an enchanter, a diviner, or whatever, right? Theoretically, you have supernatural powers. But when push comes to shove, they don't. So Nebuchadnezzar says, well, you're useless. Hey, let's just kill all these guys, and we'll move on with life. Well, as the guard comes to kill Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, because they're part of this crew, Daniel says, I'll do it. Tell the king to call me in whenever he's free, and I'll do it. He hasn't prayed yet. He hasn't sought God yet. He just knows this is life or death, and he has confidence that God's going to come through. Right? So the guard does exactly that. Meanwhile, Daniel goes back to his buddies and says, guys, we need to pray. We need to pray now. And they do. They pray that God will give him revelation, all that kind of stuff. Right? So the king calls in Daniel and says, Daniel, I want you to tell me what I dreamed. And I want you to tell me what it means. And Daniel says, well, that's impossible. No man can do that. But I tell you what, God can. The God that I serve can do this. And here's what he says. You had a dream, right? You had a dream of a big, tall statue. And that statue had the head, if you have your Bible open to Daniel chapter 2, help me out here, had a head of gold. The torso of silver. Lower strike zone area, like thighs of bronze. No. We missed a step, didn't we? How many? No, are there 5 parts? There's 5 parts. Gold, silver? Yeah, so there's 5 parts. Sorry about that. So bronze, iron, and then iron and clay. Just kind of mixed together, right? He says, so you saw this great statue, and then there was this mountain. And from this mountain came a rock that no human cut out. And that rock rolled down the mountain, and it struck the statue, and it shattered it, because the feet were impure. They were made of clay mixed with iron. So it shattered the feet, and the whole thing tumbles down. So far, so good, right? All right. And then he says, now let me tell you what it means. Well, first off, Nebuchadnezzar's like, yes, that is my dream. That's my dream. So Daniel says, well, let me tell you what it means. You are the head of gold. This is you and your beautiful empire. After you will come more kings, more empires, right? One of silver, one of bronze, one of iron, and eventually iron mixed with clay. And the rock that rolls down is the rock that God sends, and it will dash it to pieces, and the whole statue is going to fall. Right? This is a showing of the rising and falling of empires. and that God will eventually set up an empire that's triumphant over all of it, that'll last forever. All right, we good so far? I want to point out a couple, maybe a feature or two in this. The way we number our commandments, we don't usually set aside one for this, but the way some people number their commandments, they do. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, because we lump what comes next to it into that one, we don't usually number it this way, because the Bible doesn't number them, it just says there's 10 of them. But some people set aside, you shall not make any graven images, right? So, yes, big giant idol, right? Something else worth noting. When given the instructions on how to make an altar to the Lord, so when God's talking to Abraham, for instance, he's supposed to set up an altar. If he's going to make it of stone, he needs to make it out of unhewn stone, right? You just, the way you find the stone, that's what you put there, okay? So there is a stark contrast between this, which is refined, highly worked, and this, which is just a stone that came off the mountain, clearly said that it was not worked by human hands. You could, in a sense, look at it, a contrast between a pagan idol and a proper altar to God. Now, I didn't highlight that last week, but we did highlight this. This is clearly, who is the rock? Who is the rock that God sends? Jesus, right? Jesus himself uses this language, talks about being the stone the builders rejected. He talks about being a stumbling stone for those who reject him. Woe to those on whom it falls, or it'll crush them, right? Jesus is the rock. His kingdom will last forever, right? All right, so that's the message that Nebuchadnezzar got last week. And because Daniel gave him not what he wanted to hear, but what is true, because Daniel was able to do what no one else could do, he appoints Daniel to a high position. He makes him like prime minister, basically. And Daniel says, hey, I've got these 3 buddies. Can we put them over Babylon? And Nebuchadnezzar was like, okay. That brings us up to chapter 3. There's a reason that we went through this again, which you'll see in just a moment. Chapter 3, starting at verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. I'm going to read that again. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its breadth was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon.
Possible that plane was at the foot of the hill.
Well, here's the thing. He had a dream about this tall statue that falls over, right? The very next story beat in the book of Daniel is Nebuchadnezzar makes a giant statue. But you'll notice there is a significant difference. Nebuchadnezzar goes, I understand the problem. The problem is, it should just all be gold. Just gold, gold, gold. Yeah? Fixed it. Right? A couple things worth noting here. The golden head was to represent whom in the dream? Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar says, oh, you know the big problem here, it's not all about me yet. I just got to make it all about me. If we just make it all me, it's fine. It's 60 cubits high. Now, a cubit is about half a yard, right? It's about the span from your elbow to your fingertip, right? So you can estimate that as about 1.5 feet. So 60 cubits is 90 feet tall. How wide is it? 9 feet. It's 10 times taller than it is wide. Do we have any engineers in the room? How stable do we think a statue that's 10 times taller than it is wide is going to be? I mean, I wouldn't do that. This whole thing smacks of getting the wrong message and massive pride, massive hubris, right? But it's almost impossible to think that this isn't a response to the interpretation of that dream. You know, beat after beat. You know, as a kid, the thing about being in Sunday school is you get these Sunday school stories, and they usually don't have like a lot of context to them, you know? You get the story of Daniel in the lion's den, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. And you don't get the chapter before. You don't get the chapter after, right? When we learn about Jonah, you learn about the whale. There's a whole lot of book that isn't that. Or fish, whatever, if you're going to, it's fine. Okay? There's a whole lot of, and so I always assumed that this was just some sort of like idol, and it is. But I never understood what drove this. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Human nature of trying to fix it yourself.
Yeah, he is trying to fix it himself, isn't he? But that was never the point, right? Because the point of the story isn't this at all, it's this. Right? Why would God tell this story to this guy? What is God trying to accomplish through this dream? What's that? Yeah, but why? Why is he telling him this? What does he want to do with or in Nebuchadnezzar? Yes, that's right. God is trying to humble him. And I want you to note, because we read this last week, throughout, Daniel kept talking about how God gave him this. That was in the text last week, in the interpretation. God has put you in this place. God has given you this honor. He's not saying these things to inflate his ego. He's saying them to humble him. You didn't do this, God did. And along with that comes a responsibility. We're laying seeds for what's coming ahead. I've only read one verse so far, so let's keep going. All right, so verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All right. Whenever I read this story as a kid, I always pictured that it was like the whole kingdom was there to do the thing with the statue. You know what's going to happen because you've heard the story before. But it isn't. There isn't even an invitation to common folk. The invitation is to all the VIPs, all the people in positions of power and authority. And what is the invitation to specifically? Read verse 2 again if you need. What are they invited to? To the dedication, right? The ribbon cutting ceremony. Verse 3. And we'll talk about the VIP thing here in a minute. Verse 3, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials. Why can't he just say all the officials and go on with that? All right. All the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipes, I don't know, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up." All right. Fact number 1. Daniel likes making lists. Let's move on to more important stuff. All the VIPs got invited to this event, and when they're there and gathered together, then they're told what they're supposed to do. As far as I can tell, on the invitation that went out, nowhere on there did it say, "Come bow down to the idol that Nebuchadnezzar made." Certainly nowhere on that invitation did it say, "Come worship this giant idol, or we'll throw you in a fiery furnace." Like, they held all those little bits back until everybody's already there. Feel a little manipulation here, right? It's like, hey, you're being invited to this high honor. We're going to have the dedication of this great work of art. Cool. Will there be champagne? No. There will be a fiery furnace. Why all the VIPs? So this kingdom is huge. It's massive, right? They've just been conquering nation after nation. There's no feasible way to get everybody there. But what they did was they got all the leaders there, right? Because when the leaders do the thing, then the commoners are expected to follow suit, right? I did this thing. I bowed down to Nebuchadnezzar. You're not better than me, right? So in that list of VIPs, who's going to be there? Daniel and? Yep. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans, remember those were the guys who could not interpret the dream from last chapter, came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Why is that? Well, this is probably jealousy at work, right? Think about chapter 1. They are the best of the best. They get everybody's good food taken away. The report, according to the author, is that they were 10 times wiser than everybody else. Have you ever worked in an environment where somebody was 10 times better than you? Maybe if you have a lot of humility, you can just be happy for that. But I think for a lot of people, it's going to engender some hard feelings, you know? I think it's going to... He thinks he's so great just because he's so great. Like, who does he think he is? So there's some bitterness going into this that is implicit in the text. It's not explicit, but it is implicit. And so I think we see it manifesting here. They declared to Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a fiery furnace. There are certain Jews who you appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Who is not on that list? Why not?
I mean, there's many ways
I think it's more political than that. Daniel is in a higher position than them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are probably roughly peers. Nebuchadnezzar knows Daniel well. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got placed there because Daniel made a request. Nebuchadnezzar might not really know them at all, right? He knows that Daniel has the ear of God. He knows that Daniel is powerful from his perspective. But these other guys, he doesn't, right? And so, if they can't get all of them, maybe at least they can get these guys who are rivals, peers, what have you. But I think Daniel right now is probably untouchable to them because he's a little too close to the king. You know, and when you start pointing fingers at the king's friend, that's going to look worse on you than on them. Remember, the Chaldeans were the ones who could not deliver on the dream. And Daniel could. Push come to shove, who's the king going to choose? Yeah. So that's why, even though this is the book of Daniel, I think Daniel isn't really part of this particular story. Because just where things are in the story right now, Daniel's pretty safe. These other guys, not so much. Okay.
So what are we supposed to do when we hear the music of the guitars and the drums?
Well, if you're bowing down to worship God Almighty, great. If you're bowing down to worship an idol, don't. Stand with your chin held high and do not bow the knee, all right? All right, so verse 13. I tell you what, better than take my advice, let's just see. Let's see what the men of God do in this story. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up?" He doesn't actually wait for an answer. He just keeps going. "Now, if you are ready when you hear the music, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who shall deliver you out of my hands?" I'm going to hang a lantern on this because it's something that I discussed with Jim actually a couple months ago about this book, and I think it's worth noting. Did Nebuchadnezzar target Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they had been a thorn in his side? Had they been making a big stink about this worship situation? No. Far as we can tell, what they had done thus far is serve in the civil government with all the wisdom and skill that they had. Now, that did make some enemies. Not their fault, but it happens. Clearly, we have an ungodly civil government in this situation. And the response of God's people was not to try and overthrow that ungodly government. It was to serve God by serving with their skills and abilities, but reserving their worship for God alone. And that winds up being a testimony. But let's read it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." Easy, tiger. "We have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Think that through with me. Think that through with me. Yes?
This sounds like, to me, it sounds like they're kind of going against this idea of never put your God to the test. Because they declare that they're going to do something in God. They're basically saying God's going to do this for us. Are they putting God to the test?
No. And I'll show you why. What they are doing is obeying God. Obeying God is never putting God to the test. God says, you shall have no idols. They say, okay, we will have no idols. And here's the thing. We have faith, despite God not telling us so. We have faith that God will save us. He didn't promise that he'd save us from the fiery furnace. And so even if he doesn't save us, that's okay. We'd rather burn than bow down. They're not pushing God. It's actually the opposite of that. They are submitting themselves to God. They're saying, God has made his will clear, and we trust him to do whatever he thinks is right if we obey. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and they didn't come to the king to make this an issue. He came to them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, they didn't come, asking for some sort of like religious exemption or something, right? The king came to them. This is risky stuff, right? Now, I do want you to note, because this is kind of helpful in understanding the book, that
The real Bible said God is able to deliver.
yeah,
It didn't say that he would deliver, but that he was able.
yeah, he is able to, right? Just read the whole verse to me. It's verse 17, probably, right?
If it be so, our
God, whom we serve, is.
able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king.
Yep. The only word I have different is your instead of thy. Yeah, he is able.
Yeah.
And he will, verse 18, but if not,
But
not.
if not,
be it
it's
known
okay.
to thee, O king, that we will
We still will not bow down.
nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up.
Yes. I think this is really powerful stuff, right? Their obedience to God is not contingent on God doing what they want.
Right.
If God saves me, then you'll learn something today. And if he doesn't, well, I'm still going to go down swinging. I know what's right because God has shown me what's right. And I will do what's right, whatever the cost. But I tell you what, I know God can do this. And I believe he will.
You look at Daniel's life. He couldn't help but, to me, if I was him, he couldn't help but believe that God was going to deliver him because of how he's been taking care of him up to now.
Well, that's sort of what this story is. It's about people taking these steps of faith. They're on a precipice. And there's no ground underneath them. But they know God is saying, step out in faith. So they do. This is powerful stuff if we'll grab a hold of it. Because I think sometimes we really, really, really want to wait for that special revelation. We really want to wait for God to whisper in our ear, okay, go for it. But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's just, no, you know what God wants. You're just scared to do it. But if you do it, trust him. Trust him with whatever comes next. If there's echoes of Job here, right? It's like the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, right? I will worship him if he delivers me. or if he doesn't. I will worship him in any case.
You know, it feels like there are a lot of parallels to what these three were going through today. There's a lot of line drawing going on with people where they're saying, okay, you have to pick a side.
Yeah.
You're either going to pick the side of, you know, what the social progressives are saying is acceptable, or we're going to pass laws that basically say we can jail you if you don't start doing, you know, if you don't start using the words that we tell you to use, then we will jail you.
Right.
The reason we don't use those words is because we're obedient to God.
Yeah.
It feels like there's some parallels going on here. So does this suggest we shouldn't stand up and try to do something about it, or do we just be faithful that God's going to take care of it?
So, whether or not you're pushing for social change, these guys aren't. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no place that a Christian should do this. But what I am saying is, if we're going to learn from how they do it, they're not. And when we get to the end of the chapter, it'll be remarkable too. You'll see why.
They didn't tear the statue down. They just said, we're not going to follow your traditions.
Right. Yes. They're not saying nobody else should do it. They're simply saying, the God whom we serve, the one we know is real, the one we know cares for us, says no. And so, I'm sorry, no. Now we should keep going.
Sorry if I distracted.
No. Because this is the point. This is why I want to do the book right now, in particular. Right? Because there are pressures from the society around us pushing to do things, to say things, to bow down in ways that God says no. The sermon today is going to be about God who brings courage, not fear, right? All right. I'm not going to get to the end of the chapter. I'm so sorry. I'm not going to get to the end of the chapter today.
You were on a roll, man.
I know, I was. You know what? Let's just spend the next couple minutes on this point, and we'll wrap up there, and we'll pick up with the fallout. We'll pick up with the consequences next week. So,
I guess you could call it the cremation that wasn't.
the cremation that wasn't. Yeah, yeah. They get it all wrong. Actually, spoilers for next week. Not only do they not get rid of the three guys, they wind up with a bonus guy. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. All right, but yeah, so this is the point that I want to raise to you today, that there is a strong parallel, right? I think, as 20th and 21st century Americans, we used to be very comfortable with the idea that the government can't or won't, society can't or won't ask you to do things that are unchristian. That's a historical novelty. Almost no society has ever been like that. And to expect that it's going to continue that way indefinitely here is just silly, right? But what we get here, just like we did in Acts, what we get here is a template for how a Christian comports themselves in those situations. And we'll talk about the tearing down of the idol next week, because it comes up, which is great. I would just say maybe the big takeaway points today are this. You have a relationship with God and His Word. He is making clear to you what He desires, what is good and right. You don't have to be an irritant. You don't have to try and fix the system. Right? When we do that, a lot of times the danger is we start then impressing our will as opposed to God's. I mean, this is the story of the rise and fall of governments and nations. And systems, right? It's like, well, this one fails. We're going to fix it until all of the problems in that system crop up. And that's not this story at all. Right? The story of Daniel, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is the story of doing what is right and God-pleasing, no matter what the cost, and trusting God to handle the fallout. So I'll leave you on a cliffhanger. Are they going to survive? Are they going in the furnace? Nobody knows. Right? It's a great story. So we'll finish that up next week. We got church coming up in about 14 minutes, so stick around.